And then the next morning is when we heard the dogs barking, and George got up, went out of the tent, and then he could see open water in front of us. He got out and he came back in and he said, "We broke up." And I said, "Broke up? What do you mean?" So I got up and got dressed and I looked out the tent 300 or 400 yards in front of us. The whole ocean had broken up. Waves are breaking over the ice, and we're floating 2 miles an hour northwest farther out into the Edmondson Gulf.
Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 323 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. It's been a while since I've had someone on the show to talk about a truly wild and crazy hunt. Well, as you just heard, I have a guest on the podcast today with me, and boy, does he have a hair-raising tale to share with you. Terry Morgan and I go to church together here in Lufkin. Now, when I first started attending this church after I moved to town, people there started asking me what I do. Without exception, every single person I met told me I needed to talk to Terry about a hunt he went on up in Canada many years ago, where a crazy set of circumstances resulted in him being adrift on an iceberg floating out into the open ocean one morning. Well, Terry is on the show with us today to tell us the whole story of that hunt. Before we do that, please do me a big favor, hit that subscribe or follow button in your podcast app, and please take a second, leave a rating and review for the show as well. Doing those things helps me reach other hunters like you who enjoy this sort of content. And boy, are you going to enjoy today's show. Okay, let's get started talking to Terry about this wild and crazy polar bear hunt up in Canada. Well, good afternoon, Terry. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Can you very briefly tell the listeners about you and your hunting experience and that sort of thing, and then we can talk about this particular hunt?
Okay. Well, born and raised here in Lufkin, East Texas area. So my dad really wasn't a hunter, but as a kid growing up, I had just a desire to go hunting. He'd take me occasionally. We'd duck hunt, go deer hunting once a year, but reading all the magazines and everything, I just, as I got my driver's license, I was able to, drive and go deer hunting. But then as I got older, I just decided that, hey, I've got all these on my bucket list that I want to get knocked out. So I've been to Africa, Mongolia, Tajikistan, New Zealand. I've hunted in Canada, Alaska, and Mexico, and of course here in the United States.
So on this particular hunt, you were up in Canada trying to hunt polar bear, right?
Correct. It's a Kalugtuk Nunavut, which it's also called Copper Mine, which is on the south of the polar bear range. We hunted into, I think, what they call the Union Strait there on the sea ice.
Okay, I'm looking it up on Google Maps right now, so I know where we are. Okay, so for those that don't know, this is a territory in Canada that used to be part of the Northwest Territory? Yeah, and even when I was a kid, it was all just the Northwest Territory. It split off in the late 90s, and it's about the size of the state of Texas, and 36,000 people live there. So it is a lot of wide open country and a lot of ice, sounds like, right?
Very remote, and Inuits are the main inhabitants of Nunavut.
How did you get up there? What was the travel like getting from Lufkin, Texas, all the way up to Copper Mine?
Well, it really wasn't that bad. You fly into Canada, Edmonton. A lot of times I'd have to overnight there, and then, or you could get a flight, and then you fly on to town there in Nunavut, and then you change planes. And I normally spend the night there, and then fly on to Kalugtuk.
Okay. Now, you were hunting polar bear. What time of year were you there?
Well, I was there late April, the 1st of May. I'd always wanted to do this, and Fred Webb was a longtime outfitter in that area, very well known. And I had contacted him, and he told me, he said, okay, you got to go on a muskox hunt first. So I did that the previous year, and if you can handle the cold, then I'll get you on the list for a polar bear. And so that's what happened. I went up there and muskox hunted, met him, camped out in the cold, and then the next year he got me a permit, and I was able to go on the hunt.
Yeah, you were there. Do I understand correctly? This is the early 2000s, like 2006?
It was May the 1st, really, when the hunt started, 2006, yes.
And where, like during the polar bear season, was that? Was that early? Was that late? Right in the middle of it?
Well, you can hunt them. They normally hunt them in February, March, April, and into May, depending upon the sea ice conditions. Usually in February and March, it's extremely cold up there, so usually it starts the end of March, April, and goes through the end of April.
And what is the weather typically like that time of year?
Well, when I did my muskox hunt, it was at night. It could be 20 below. It would normally get up to 0 to 10 degrees during the day. When I did my polar bear hunt the first time there, which was the end of April, it was 0 degrees at night, and then it could get up to 10, 15, 20 degrees during the day. However, we had a shift in the weather, the wind, and we had gotten in a big snowstorm, and it started warming up, and I think probably we got it to freezing, 30, 32 degrees during the day for part of the hunt.
And so when you were hunting muskox, sounds like it was quite a bit colder. What time of year were you there then?
That was the last March, 1st of April. They normally did the muskox hunts before they started their polar bear hunts.
Okay. And was it in generally the same type of areas, or is it two completely different habitats that you're hunting in?
Well, the muskox are on land. They paw through the snow for the moss and so forth on the rocks. So you're on land there. But when you're hunting on polar bears, you're going out onto the sea ice, because they're on the ice, looking and catching seals, which is their main diet.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
So, yeah, the first part of the hunt, we had gotten as far as 40 miles on the ocean from land.
Jeez, my goodness. Well, we'll talk more about like the specifics of the hunt and like how it's normally supposed to go here in a second. But with this sort of cold that you're dealing with, what sort of precautions and whatnot were you taking during and before the hunt to prepare all of your gear and prepare your stuff for it? And then how were you coping with it while you were there?
Well, there was a clothing system that you could buy that basically included everything. I would put on insulated underwear. I had pants that were basically made of foam that were a couple inches thick. I would normally have a wool sweater over my insulated top, and then I would have the jacket, which was basically foam, again, a couple inches thick. And then you had to wear, something over your head and face to keep the wind off. And, also on the ice or snow, you have to be very careful about sunburn. So, I put all kinds of protection on that. And then you keep your face and everything covered up. You basically you see through, you got eyes slits, and then where you can breathe, and everything else is covered.
When it comes time to make a shot, are you taking your glove off, or do you have special gloves that allow you to manipulate the trigger of your rifle? How does that work?
Yes. A couple of things. When you're hunting in that cold weather, you have to get your gun, what I call winterized, where they take all the grease out of the gun and everything, so that will not freeze. But your shots on the bears are normally within 50 yards because the dogs, they release the dogs, and the dogs will, what I call, bay the bears, which will allow you to get into a position for a 40 or 50 yard shot. Yes, you have time to take your gloves off to make the shot.
But it's not so cold out there that with taking off your glove, you're going to get frostbite just in that short period of time where you're doing that then.
No, not immediately. Not immediately. Now, you read stories of other people hunting farther north up there. There's 30 to 40 below zero, so you got to be very careful about that.
Now
I'm sorry. Go ahead. They help you prepare for all that. They guide you through what you need, and they look after you. Because being from the South here, I certainly don't understand the cold.
Oh, no, and I mean, this is a whole different level of cold that you're dealing with too. And it's not like you're going back to a cabin at the end of the day and you're able to take a hot shower and climb into a warm bed. I mean, you were sleeping in a tent out there, right?
Yes, they have a tent. On my first hunt, I stayed in a tent. But, it's a canvas tent, but they have a Coleman stove in there that they can warm up. They have caribou hides that they put on the floor to keep the cold from coming up through the hides and so forth. And then they provide you with a very warm sleeping bag, a canvas bag that they use for the hunters up there. So, inside the tent, they can get it warmed up. You could take your jacket off for a short period of time. And you think about it, though, your water bottle that can freeze, if you wanted to keep anything from freezing, you pretty much had to put it in your sleeping bag at night.
Yeah, I believe that. You mentioned earlier that you had to go on this muskox hunt before he would book you for the polar bear hunt, but the muskox hunt was earlier in the year and it was colder. And so was he making you prove yourself on that hunt because the muskox hunt was like in an area where they could get you out of there easier if you couldn't deal with the cold or something? Do you know what his reasoning was with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a mindset. You're hunting with some great people, Inuits, who are very good hunters that were raised and they know the country very well. They don't speak real good English, so there is kind of a lack of communication. In most cases, you're there on the hunt by yourself, along with one or two guides. So you just kind of have to get yourself psyched out for that experience. And I don't know, the polar bear hunts are longer. They could last up to 2 weeks. You're in a very remote area. So, and I was planning on doing a muskox hunt anyway. So that gave me a little preparation for my bear hunt.
Okay. What rifle did you bring on this polar bear hunt, and same with the muskox hunt if it was different?
On my muskox hunt, I used a 300 Magnum Winchester that I've used on most all my hunts. On the bear hunt, I took a 375. I had that from when I went to Africa and had used it on most of my bear hunts, and that's more than adequate. I mean, they kind of would laugh at you with that big caliber of gun. Anything 30-06, 300 Winchester Magnum would fine for the polar bear because you're very close to them.
Yeah, I mean, there's the example that always gets thrown around out there, especially in the internet forums and whatnot, people talking about calibers and all that stuff. The Inuit use a .222 Remington and shoot polar bear in the head with it and all that. And I'm sure a lot of them have, and that's fine. But I can understand why you would want to use a 375 on that hunt. Did you use this same rifle, say, hunting grizzly bear or brown bear prior to this hunt?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I had it, so it was easy to take. And yes, they used a 223 on everything, the Inuits. They're very good shots. And
what model rifle is your 375?
It's a Winchester.
Oh, okay. All right, same deal. All right, so is a similar deal with your 300 Win Mag?
Yes. That was I had a Remington at that time on 300 Winchester that I shot, and I've used it on almost all of my hunts, except for going on the bear hunts or to Africa.
All right. So you have this hunt. Did you say that you were originally booked for 2 weeks of actual hunting for the polar bear?
Yes,
All right. So is that a typical length of a hunt for polar bear?
Yes, it is. But in most cases, you're going to get a bear before the 2 weeks is up. But that was the length of hunt that I had booked, and my plane flights for that. Yes.
All right. So you get up there. Tell us the story of how things are supposed to go. What's the general concept of a polar bear hunt out in the ice and all that stuff?
So the Inuits, you travel out on the sea ice from Kalugtuk. They have 2 snowmobiles pulling the sled. The hunter rides in the sled along with the gear and so forth. And then they pull a dog sled, and then the dogs are running alongside of it. You are required to hunt polar bears only on the dog sled. So they'll get out on the sea ice, and then they'll start glassing and traveling around, and you travel on the dog sled for that. When they see tracks and they can tell whether they're fresh or not, then they'll start following them, and they'll also get on ice ridges or pressure ridges where the ice has come together, and they may be 5-10 feet tall, and they can get up and they glass. And then once the bear is spotted, they'll cut a couple of the dogs loose, and the dogs will smell them, and they'll run towards the bear, and basically the bear will stop and start fighting with the dogs, and then you get as close as you can to get a shot on the bear.
So, man, all right. And so when you're out there just cruising around trying to find the bears, you said they're getting up high where they can to glass for them. You're trying to find tracks, and you can see, okay, is this fresh? Is this a big bear, or is it a little bear? Are we going to follow it or not? Do you for someone like me that's never been up there, it would seem like almost all the ice would look the same. Do you know what the heck they were looking for, trying to find areas where the bears might be?
They really want to try, and they know from experience where the seal holes are, where the seals may be. And the seals will make a place in the ice. And a lot of times they'll get out of the ice and lay around during the day the hole, or they'll for sure come up there and stick their nose up to breathe. And the bears know where these areas are, and that's what the Inuits, your guides, are looking for. And you'll go to those areas that they're familiar with, and that's where the tracks are normally found on the bear.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it makes sense. Just like anything else you're hunting, you find what they want to eat, whether that's a predator or a prey animal that you're after, and hunt that food source for them, and hopefully you get lucky and find one that's in that area, and then it all works out. At what point do you transition from the snowmobile over to the dog sled?
Well, while you're traveling to wherever you're going to basically set up your camp, you're on the snowmobiles. But once you set up camp, then you normally position to the dog sleds, and you travel away from camp on that.
Okay.
And then, of course, you'll come back to camp at night. And then if you're going to another location, then they'll pack everything up and use the snowmobiles to transport you to another location where you set up camp.
All right. So it seemed like you said that these bears are hunted maybe late March, April, and into May. So were you a little bit late in the season when you went on this particular hunt?
Yes, I was the very last hunter of the year, and they evaluate the ice conditions, before they allow you to come up there. And I know I had gotten a call from Fred, and he said my other bear hunter got a bear, and then you get on a plane and you get up there as fast as you can.
Wow. Okay. So
yes, it was the late it was the late end of the polar bear. Now they can hunt them as late as you want to, and a lot of them are hunted in the early fall too. But I was the last hunter for this one.
So even though it is still really cold up there that time of year, you are going into the spring. Temperatures are starting to warm up relative to what they are there during the wintertime, and so sometimes that causes some complications out there. So can you talk about the beginning of your hunt and just start from when you got there, how things went, and then just tell us how things went sideways for you out there?
Sure. Well, you fly into Klugtuck. They pick you up from the airport. You go to Fred's house. Usually you get there early in the morning. So you change clothes, you pack your gear that you're going to take on the hunt, and then you leave from the town there on snowmobiles. And we traveled all day. I mean, we probably traveled 50 or 60 miles that day. And then we set up a camp and spent the night, got up the next day, and they'd already had another base camp set up farther out on the sea ice, which was about 40 miles from land. We were there for a couple of days, not seeing anything. My guide made the decision. We packed up, and we did leave some of our gear there. We went back kind of southwest, closer to the land, about 20 miles from there. But during the day, a storm had been blowing in, and you had these days what they call a whiteout, where the snow is blowing and you cannot see. So basically, you just sit in camp all day long. But we transitioned to this other, and we set up a camp that afternoon, and it was pretty much a whiteout. But we had a southeast wind blowing, and that kind of caused it to warm up a little bit. But the sea ice will break apart, but then come back together, depending upon the wind conditions. We did not see any open water at that point in time, but we went to bed that night, wind still blowing very hard, and then the next morning is when we heard the dogs barking, and George got up, went out of the tent, and then he could see open water in front of us. And he got out and he came back in and he said, "We broke up." And I said, "Broke up? What do you mean?" So I got up and got dressed, and I looked out the tent 300 or 400 yards in front of us. The whole ocean had broken up. Waves are breaking over the ice, and we're floating 2 miles an hour northwest, farther out into the Edmondson Gulf. We knew at that time we were in trouble. Of course, me not knowing anything, being naive, I just kind of said, "Okay, what's going on?" And then George got the satellite phone and tried calling back to Klugtuck, Nunavut, and his didn't work. Just thankfully, my wife had insisted that I bring a satellite phone along with me. That's the first time I've ever taken one. And mine worked, and we were able to call back into town and talk to Fred. And then that's what started the process of what we were going to do and where we were headed with this. As I said, we were going farther out into the Gulf, and the ocean, from what you could tell, was breaking up. We started plotting it with a GPS on how far we were going and where, and then we were calling back every couple of hours. And then Fred, in the meantime, was trying to find a plane or a helicopter or something to help us get off the ice. The Canadian police didn't have anything in that area to help us with. That's when it started the process of trying to find a helicopter. So Fred started reaching out to some oil companies that had helicopters positioned around that area. And I don't know the exact rules on the helicopters, but you have to have a certain size helicopter to be flying over the ocean. And the nearest one was in Holman, which was like 200 to 300 miles away. So they had to have some fuel stashed somewhere to be able to make the trip. And they found a helicopter, but it was being maintenance was done on it, so they had to put the helicopter back together, complete the maintenance for it, and then we arranged for it to come and extract us off the ice. Really, we were there for 2 days. The helicopter picked us up late on the second day, and the weather was very bad. We could hear the helicopter flying around, but they couldn't necessarily see us. Finally, we got a break in the sky, and the helicopter could see us, and we were waving tarps and so forth, and then it was able to land. And then we loaded our gear. The assistant guide went out the first time. So on the second trip, the helicopter came. We loaded some more gear up and went back, and they landed, and they came back, and George and I went out on the third trip. When we got up in the air, the helicopter pilot, he said, "Man, do you know how lucky you are?" And I said, "No, not really." And he said, "Another 6 to 12 hours, y'all would have been in the water." So the ocean was breaking up that quick. We were actually, from where they evacuated us, we were 25 miles from land, and we had 20 miles of open water.
Oh, my gosh. So if we go back here, you said that your last day of hunting before all this happened, you had a storm. It was white out. You didn't know exactly what the deal was. So you make camp, and you're not exactly sure how far away from the ocean you were, but you couldn't see it from camp, right? From open water.
Well, we were camped on the sea ice. I mean, it's frozen ice.
Yeah.
But due to the wind, it broke up overnight, and that's why the dogs were barking. I guess they just sensed something. And then, from our tent, we were about 300 to 400 yards of open. The ice was gone, and the water was just being blown on the waves and so forth on the ice.
Yeah, so I'm looking at a map of this area right now, and I see you got some big bays, and like there's the mainland, you got a bunch of water, then there's islands kind of scattered around out there. You were on the sea ice in the open ocean between these pieces of land, and was it like solid all the way across and just broke up into a million pieces that night, or was there like a hard edge to it at some point that just got a lot closer to you when the storm came? Or do you know?
Well, I believe because of the current, the wind current, it just broke the ocean up overnight. And the wind will move the ice, and it can blow back into various, pieces of ice. And in fact, the afternoon of the first day, George had us pack up camp, and we moved from one piece of ice to another. When it had blown into it, I guess he just had a inclination that was something that we needed to do. Mm-hmm. And then that's a story in itself. The assistant guide had not tied down our tents on the sled, and when we got on this other piece of ice, we realized our tents were gone.
Oh,
they had fallen off because the ice was very rough at that point in time. The ice was opening up. In fact, some of the dogs had fallen off in the water, and we had to lasso and pull them out. But fortunately, George was able to get on the snowmobile and get on the other piece of ice, and he found our tents and brought them back. And of course, it was drifting apart, the ice, but he was able to get enough speed to take him over the water onto our piece of ice.
Jeez, man, just everything about this hunt just sounds wild and crazy with the extreme temperature and then it warming up and then, going from one piece of ice to the next. And so you said when this whole thing went to pieces, you said 300 to 400 yards away from the ocean, right? From the open water. How big was this big chunk of ice you guys were floating on?
It was probably, it started out, it was probably a half a mile long and a quarter a mile wide.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was a good piece of ice, but you go to bed that night and everything is just one big, for as far as you can see, it was ice. And then you get up the next morning and it was just breaking off into smaller and smaller pieces.
And was that big piece of ice continually getting smaller and smaller the longer you guys were on it, like in a cartoon?
Yes, because, like the helicopter guy told me when we got in the helicopter and you could get up and you could kind of see, he said, man, you don't know how lucky you were. Another 6 to 12 hours, the ice would have broken up and you'd have been in the water.
Was it noticeably smaller was the ice that you were on noticeably smaller when the helicopter picked you up?
Yes, yes. It was diminishing in size.
Oh my goodness, geez. So the helicopter lands and it takes you guys in shifts off there. You're taking some of the people, some of the equipment, some of the dogs, and they just shuttled you back to dry land. And then what did you guys do?
So we set up camp there on the land. And we had plenty of food and everything, but we had to leave some of the sleds on the ice. So we really only had one sled, but we had our two snowmobiles. So we were then, George called back into town and talked with Fred, and he sent some more snowmobiles the next day to come get us and to pack our stuff off. And from where we were on land back to Kalugtuk was 180 miles. So it took us 2 days to get back to town.
So was that the end of that hunt?
Yes. After that, Fred said, it's too dangerous. Don't want you coming back this year. And we agreed. We worked out, the helicopter was quite expensive, but we came up with a fair agreement, and I went back the following year and then got a bear.
Ah, okay, good. So can you briefly tell us the story about that hunt?
Well, it was that was pretty anticlimactic compared to the first one. But we hunted in the same general area as we did, and I think it was like on the 4th or 5th day of the hunt, we got on tracks, and then I was able to get a bear.
And did you shoot it with that same 375 you brought on your first hunt?
I did, yeah.
And did it go down kind of like you described it, with the dogs baying it and then getting in close like that?
Yes, those dogs, they are really something when they get on a bear. I call it like an East Texas hog hunt when the dogs bay a hog. It's almost like that on a bear hunt. The dogs are around the bear irritating it, and then you're able to get in and then get a pretty close shot. And, you want to hit them in the shoulders, and if you do that, then they immediately go down. You certainly don't want to wound one, because if they get off in the water and then swim off, you've lost your bear. So you have to be careful about that.
How does a polar bear compare in size to a brown bear or a grizzly bear?
The body shapes are different. The polar bear's head and neck is slender compared to a grizzly or a brown bear. And I've done both what we call an Arctic grizzly and a grizzly hunt. I've got a brown bear and a polar bear. My polar bear was probably a small to average bear. I was just fortunate. I hunted for 10 days over a 2-year period, and I saw one set of tracks, and then I was able to get this bear.
Mm-hmm. Were you able to get that bear trophy home afterwards?
Yes, I was able. I got it. There was a CITES. It requires a CITES permit, but the United States government put an embargo. You can't import any more polar bear hides into the United States. But I was fortunate. I got mine in before that law went into place. So I have my bear mounted in my trophy room.
What kind of mount do you have of it?
I have a full-bodied mount.
Is he standing up in that typical polar bear pose? You see a lot of them.
No, he's on his all fours, kind of mounted on an iceberg.
Whew, okay. Well, I mean that's fitting to have it set up like that.
Yeah.
So what did your wife say when she heard about all this drama on your first hunt?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. I was leaving on a Saturday, and I had ordered this satellite phone. And she asked me on Thursday morning, have you gotten your phone? And I said, no. I said, I hadn't thought about it. I need to call them. She walked out the door that Thursday morning and locked the door and heard the phone ring. So she walked back in and answered the phone, and they said, we failed to ship his phone. Do you still want it? She said, yes. So they overnighted it to me, and I got my phone on Friday and then, of course, left on Saturday.
Whew.
I was checking in with her. I was calling every 2 days on my hunt, just letting her know how we were going and everything. Mm-hmm. So when all this was going on, I said, there's no need me calling her and worrying her about all this. So I did not call during that period of time when the ice was breaking up. But when we got on shore that evening, I called her and I said, Susan, I'm going to be home in a couple of days. They've ended my hunt. Will you get me work on my tickets and get me an airline out? And she said, oh, you got a bear? And I said, no, but let's not get into this right now. She was very worried about this hunt and everything. And then I told her what was going on, and she just shook her head and said, I can't believe this happened to you. But, everything worked out.
Oh, my goodness, man. Well, how did she feel about your return trip the next year? And how did you feel about that with knowing what you dealt with the previous year?
It was just one of those things that you experience in life. I mean, it was a dangerous situation. I said a lot of prayers. I had good experienced guides, and we were calm, and things worked out. The Inuits, this is their life up there. They're very unique people, how they live. And, George was a very experienced guide. So, there was a little apprehensive, but, I'm glad I went back. I had a good hunt the second time and got a bear.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got quite a story about it too. How many times have you told this story in the last 18 years?
Oh, I've told it a lot. It makes for a good story. Everything worked out. God was looking after me, and he brought me back home.
Oh my goodness, man. Well, it's an interesting thing just how certain people are. There's certain people I'm sure that are going to listen to this episode and think, man, that is amazing. That's really cool. That's a great story, happy ending and all that. And there's a lot of other people that are probably thinking, Terry, you are not selling these polar bear hunts. That does not sound like the sort of thing that I want to do.
Well, I hunted, I did a muskox hunt with them. I did 2 polar bear hunts. I went back up on a Arctic grizzly hunt, and then I did a Greenland muskox and a caribou hunt on Victoria Island, which is farther north up there. And I hunted with George on these hunts. He was a very experienced. I love the Inuit people, their culture, how they live up there. It's just unbelievable how they lived and still do.
Yeah, that is the very definition of a guy that I'll bet is a calm and collected problem solver, because you can't rely on getting help up there. You got to just work on a lot of stuff yourself. and one, avoid problems when you can, and then do your best to deal with those problems when they arrive and not panic and not make it worse.
Yeah, that's true. Things worked out.
Whew, man. Well, so you did this on 2006. So I guess you got your muskox in '05. You had this hunt in '06. You shot your bear the following year in 2007. And you've done all sorts of stuff, I'm sure, since then. We're recording this in 2024. What is the future holding for you?
Oh, well, I love going hunting. I like going to a different country or area and hunting different species of animals. I've got what they call the Super Slam, which is the North American big game animals, the 29, and that includes your sheep, the 4 species of sheep in that. They've since taken the 29 to 40 North American big game animals, and I'm at about 35 there. So I'm hoping to get the 40 animals there, which are some subspecies of the different animals that I already have.
Do you know offhand which specific ones you're still lacking?
I've got an alligator that I need. I have a Fannin sheep hunt booked next year that would give me my other species of sheep. I've got a Central Barren Ground caribou hunt booked in Greenland this August that I'm going on. And then there's a red and a gray brocket deer in southern Mexico that I've got to get that done. And then basically a lynx, or there's some other animals that you could substitute for that, and that would give me my 40.
Wow.
There's a walrus hunt too. You can't import those into the United States, but you get to hunt them with the Inuits, and I'm very interested in doing that in the next couple of years.
Okay, and you have done quite a bit of sheep hunting in these past few years as well, right?
Yes. Of course, I got my Grand Slam on sheep, and then my son and I went to Mongolia, and there's 3 species of sheep there called Argalis, which is your Gobi, Hangai, and Altai Argali. And I was fortunate to get all 3 species there. And then my son and I both got the 2 different ibex, the Gobi and the Hangai. And then we did a morel stag, which is similar to a red deer or elk. We both got good animals there. And then we both got a gazelle. Mongolia was a very great hunt, going with my son and that. So that was probably, going to Mongolia was one of my better trips there. Of course, I like going all over.
So I'm looking at what do they call it? The Rex Baker Super 40, a North American game. I see they have a bear here that's a glacier bear. Is that the Arctic grizzly that you were referencing earlier?
No. That is it's a blue phase color black bear, and it's hunted in a specific area in Alaska. It is. I've heard of a couple of people, Rex Baker, great hunter. I've met him twice. But that's a specific black bear in one certain area. They're very hard to come by. I probably will never hunt one of those, but I'd love to have one.
Okay. And so I see they took this list and just broke it down as small as possible. You have the Western Canadian moose, Eastern Canadian moose, the Sherris moose, the Alaska moose. They split the Fannin sheep off from the stone sheep and the Dall sheep, and you got the Rocky Mountain, California, and Desert Bighorn, and Aoudad on there too. That's interesting.
Yes.
But yeah, darn near anything that you can think of hunting in North America is on this. And so, looks like you'll be getting that one here in a few years if all goes well.
Hopefully.
Well, good deal, Terry. I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us about this wild and crazy polar bear hunt. And I'm glad that things turned out okay and that you ended up being able to go back in the following year and get a bear and then get that bear home afterwards too, because I don't know, they haven't been able to do that for a while. Any closing thoughts you want to share with the audience before we say goodbye today?
Oh, I just, everybody has their different ideals of hunting and what they like to do. I consider myself an environmentalist. I love hunting. I love taking a species of animal, enjoying the country, the culture, the people, the food. That's what gets me excited. It's not necessarily harvesting the animal; it's everything that goes with it, and that's what makes me continue to go on these trips.
Well, and you definitely seem to have a love for adventure and experiencing new and unique things with your hunts way up north and then in Central Asia and Mongolia and all of that. That's a lot of places your average person, and even some of your more adventuresome hunters are never going to go.
Well, I love hunting whitetails here in East Texas and duck hunting and doing all that. So no matter what the animal, I like going the thrill of the chase.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, thanks a lot, Terry, for sharing the story with us. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Boy, talk about a rude surprise to wake up to in the morning. You go to sleep in the middle of a giant ice pack with ice as far as the eye can see. Then you wake up in the morning and get the rude surprise to discover that all that ice has broken up overnight and you're now on an iceberg floating out into the open ocean. It just goes to show how quickly things can go wrong in an environment like that, even with an experienced guide like Terry had. Guides like that do their best to avoid getting into situations like they experienced, but they also need to be quick thinking and calm under pressure to deal with issues when they arise as well, because invariably things are going to happen out there. You do your best to avoid them, but things still happen sometimes, and they just got to roll with the punches, adapt to the circumstances, and get everybody safely out of there when something goes wrong. Now, it's a darn good thing Terry had his own satellite phone that worked too, and luckily they made it home safe. Like we mentioned a little bit in the show, the guide had his own satellite phone, but if we didn't make it clear earlier, the guide was Canadian, and so was the outfitter. They were prudent, purchased some satellite phones to use in an emergency like that, but being Canadians in Canada, hunting in Canada, they bought phones with a Canadian SIM card or quote-unquote Canadian plan on them, so to speak. So they only worked in Canada. Now, you would think that wouldn't be an issue, right? We're hunting in Canada. The phone should work just fine. But as it turned out, and it wasn't clear to them when they got those phones, that if you leave Canadian waters and get more than 12 miles offshore, then the phone doesn't work anymore. Now, the only way that you would know that is to take that phone 12 miles offshore, try to make a phone call on it. The only reason that they would have cause to do that is if they were in an emergency. And since you rarely get into a true emergency under those circumstances, they had no way of knowing that was the deal. However, Terry had a satellite phone with a so-called international plan on it. And it turns out that plan just worked everywhere that they had satellite coverage. So when the guide's phone didn't work, his fortunately did. It allowed them to get into contact. The outfitter and the guide were able to make the necessary logistical arrangements and get them out of there. Now, if you enjoyed this hair-raising tale and want to listen to another episode where the hunter got a little bit more adventure than they bargained for, check out episode 130, Joseph von Benedict's solo caribou hunt in Alaska. Things didn't get quite as crazy for Joseph as they did for Terry on this hunt, but things were still pretty touch and go there for a little while, and it was also a very interesting story that also had a happy ending to it, though, fortunately. But that's an awesome show, definitely worth listening to. Link is in the show notes if you want to check it out. Now, if you enjoyed this episode with Terry, make sure you sign up for my email list. To do that, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com, sign up for my free ebook on the best hunting calibers. You'll get that free ebook when you do that, plus you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. If you like the podcast, especially episodes like this one with Terry, you will love those emails. So make sure you are getting them too by going to huntingguns101.com. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to the BigGameHuntingBlog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.